What's good on this fine evening, people? How you doing today? You all right? Good. Yep. Apparently, I still got my coffee with me. Today, I have a good excuse for it, though. I was trying out a new type of dessert, and it's different than the desserts that I usually make. And well, let's say I partook of it, and it's a little more potent than I expected it to be. uh, Good tidings. Good tidings. Anywho, so what are we going to talk about today? I wanted to open it up to question and answer. Like I did last time. I want to answer as many questions as I possibly can, but I think that there's a better subject to approach today. And you'll have to forgive me as my wit is somewhat compromised in the moment. So I might be a bit scattered in how I convey some of this. But the most important question and the most useless question people ask is, how do you know? How do you know? You know how many people ask me that question on a regular basis? How do you know? How do you know? How do you know? How do you know? The reason they ask me this question isn't to actually understand how I know the things I purport to, but instead to try and trip me up by, I guess, exposing the belief that my view and perspective is somehow invalid because no recognized authority supports things I claim to, even though technically if they actually investigated even a little bit, they'd find pretty much no authority can go against anything that I'm saying because authority ultimately builds up to the frames that I purport to see in real time. And I kind of ventured off there, but the question of how do you know? Everybody's quick to ask other people, how do you know? How do you know? How do you know? You know what no one ever asks themselves? How do I know? How do I know? How do I know the things that I've learned are correct? How do I know this person purporting to be an authority figure and who's taken the task of thinking for and making decisions on behalf of me? How do I know that they're trustworthy? How do I know that I can trust this? How do I know that I can trust that? How do I know? If you're a narcissist, you already assume you know. It doesn't matter the amount of information you have backing your proclaimed knowledge. You assume you know. One of the things that I love to do is ask people to explain themselves because most people are very given to the idea that they simply know things that they've never taken time to think about. When you let your pride, and when you let your competitive spirit, and when you let your aggression do all the thinking for you, you're very self-assured, even when you don't have anything to base that assurance on. But I love to ask people to explain themselves because ultimately what explaining themselves does in the way of function is show them exactly how little they know. You know, I grew up I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness growing up. I am very grateful to that religion for giving me, I guess, sort of a moral frame and compass and, grounding me in sort of good mental practices and habits. Like you had to peruse through content you'd seen 100 million times before and still come up with a way to try and make what someone else was saying yours so that you could express it authentically. Very good in disciplining people in that way. Unfortunately, we grew up with a lot of terminology that let us feel knowledgeable without actually understanding what we were talking about. So there were terms like messianic this and theocratic that, and You know, it was all pretty jargon. And you get to sling this jargon around and impress peers without actually understanding what the hell you're talking about. I see a lot of people do that with academia and philosophy these days. They have all these terminologies they sling around. They have all this highfalutin. They know the words and they can string them together, and they can string this theory and that theory together, all without having any true understanding of and or awareness for what the fuck they're talking about. People confuse sounding knowledgeable with actually understanding things to a degree that they can explain them, the things that they purport to understand, in terms and in frames not related to the systems they learned. Like when you genuinely understand something, you can explain it in any number of ways. You watch me do it all the time. I understand what I'm talking about, so it doesn't matter what frame I decide to express it through. I'm going to be able to convey what I understand to audiences because I'm operating from an inherent space of understanding. You can make it super complex. You can make it very simple. But in the end, conveyance is conveyance. And when you authentically understand what you're talking about, you can express yourself fluidly through any, I guess, system of applications. But back to the question of how do you know? How do you know? How do I know? Like I said earlier, people ask me all the time, how do you know these things, Donald King? And the simple answer is I don't. I see them. I'm describing what I can see. Raises an even better question. How do you know you can trust what you see, Donald King? It's a fair question. How can I trust what I see? Well, I can test what I see against what's known and just look at paths of progress related to consistency. What follows a logical path of causality without any breaks or skips in it. Whichever one is the most consistent, and I would be pitting my perspective against convention, whichever one is the most consistent with the fewest amount of gaps that require belief or suspensions of reason in order to connect fields and systems of phenomena one to the next, which is the most consistent. I test my view and perspective against the most consistent data produced by the species that I can get access to, and 10 out of 10 times I come out on top. So how do I know that I can trust my perspective? I don't say that I know per se, but I will say this. I know what I'm looking at in terms of monitoring consistency and consistency within chains of causality. My view and perspective comes out on top. How do I know? I don't know. But when I'm comparing things in real time, I know what's the most consistent. But the reason why I bring this whole subject up of how do you know, the reason why I bring it all up, it doesn't have anything to do with what humans purport to know now. It actually has to do with what society is. Humans get a lot about society wrong. You're looking at it upside down. We're of the impression that we create society. That society emerges from our collective effort and our imaginations and through series and systems of interactions that amalgamate to create this robust network of feelings and emotions and experiences. We think society, emerges from us. To some degree, that is true, but not quite. Finally caught you live. Just popping in real quick to say hi. Hey, brother Mark, how you doing, man? My man. Yo, I'm glad to see you on here. Yo, so let's talk about, again, we talk about society. Humans get society completely wrong. All right? And it works very much like all diseases work. So what you have to understand is that a disease is comprised of two parts. There are the virion, the disease is manifesting through, and then there's the central intelligence, which sort of operates through the collective of virion. Why is it important to understand this? Because it goes to the question, how do you know? How do you know? There's a lot of questions humans never ask themselves. Because again, we're a narcissistic species. We assume that this is all our doing and that we're willing all of this shit to be through our imagination and through our greatness. There's no shortage of worshiping the mirror within this species. Humans are quick to assume that they're great. If you want to mislead a person, all you have to do is appeal to their vanity. You ever seen iron smelting? Have you ever seen iron smelting? Have you ever looked at the ridiculous series of steps humans have to go through in order to create iron? They're non-linear. They're non-sequential. You're not going to look at this rock over here on the ground and see it has some shininess in it, and then all of a sudden have this grand inspiration where you're like, oh man, I need to heat this to this degree over here in order to get it to melt down, and I have to combine it with these other minerals over here to produce an ore, and then keep it hot enough in order to knock it into a shape that I can use over and over and over again. There's no linear progression of reasoning to bring all of these materials together and to create kilns that could get hot enough, or to force wind into fire in order to get the heat hot enough to melt these or to get these things to a point where they could amalgamate. It doesn't follow a logical progression of thought. Yet somehow humans figured out iron centuries ago. Almost a millennia ago, I'm sure. How did they learn how to mine and refine gold? How do you know? The reason I ask this question is because it goes to, again, the point of what society is. Society is an organism manifesting through you. A disease is an organism that finds its way into a host's body. But the disease itself is an organism which is comprised of structural building blocks. It's a person. This collective knowledge of smelting, where did it come from? It didn't come from humans. Humans are fucking dumb. Look at all the technology around you, yet you're still lost in tribalism. You think people who look different than you are scared and need to be subdued, yet somehow you're churning out all of this advanced technology. How? If you're a narcissist and you're like, oh, it's because we're so smart. Oh, it's because we're so great. But if you're a realist and you're actually paying attention, you're like, damn. So our basic intellect, our ability to make sense of the world around us is still based in tribalism. We're still aggressive. We're still narcissistic. We're still highly competitive. Yet somehow this series of things that we're able to produce doesn't track with our intellectual growth and advancement. Why are we able to do all of these things, but our collective intelligence remains at a baseline? Why do you know? How do you know? It's because your technology, your acuity for technology, it doesn't come from you. It comes from society's hive mind. That hive mind, it belongs to an even larger collective. And through that larger collective, which has gathered all this information from a parasitic twin universe, burrowing into and transmuting and transforming the body of its host sibling, somehow that collective knowledge passes down into your mind, and it allows you to build cameras and computers, microphones and lights. Somehow you're imbued with knowledge that you didn't acquire on your own, that you didn't learn through actual trial and error. Trial and error. How do you know? If you go back into the Bible, when Adam and Eve disobeyed God, and God cast them out of the Garden of Eden, they were to subsist on bread and water for the rest of their days. Who taught them how to make bread? Who taught them how to build ovens? Who taught them how to harvest and transmute? Who taught them how to harvest and transmute vegetation into complex carbohydrates, into starches? How did they know? You go from living naked, watching all the animals run around and doing your thing, all of a sudden to clothing yourself and knowing how to transmute raw natural foods into things that I guess better suited your wow. Transform the things that better suited your biology in terms of consumption. And you have to forgive me, I dazed there for a second. But again, it goes to this point. How do you know? You see, when it comes to the things that I purport to see, I know what I'm describing because it's like, again, I see it in real time. I see it in real time. There's no knowledge is actually required. All I have to do is read principles. They just pop up in my view, in the avatar's view. And it shows them to me and I translate them. But at the end of the day, I understand the source that I speak on behalf of because it has demonstrated itself to me time and again. Most people claim to have knowledge of things that they have never even thought about. And they're so sure of themselves. They're so sure of where their inspiration comes from that they would risk life and limb to be right. They would gamble their life away because they're sure of something they never actually fucking thought about for like 2 seconds. Where does this knowledge come from? Where does human knowledge come from? Because it doesn't track, does it? Somehow you guys know how to do all this really complex stuff over here. But in your main branch of thinking, in the main system of thinking you operate within, you're just as dumb and aggressive as you were millennia ago. Why doesn't it track? Think about someone like a regular genius. You know what a genius is? I'm not a genius, but I don't actually process through systems of idealism, so I can't be considered a genius in that way, simply because a genius is a person who is gifted at conceptualizing, creating conceptual frames of fields of idealism and or systems of idealism, and then navigating throughout those frames. A genius is a person who, within a conceptual field, knows how to get from point A to point B most consistently and most efficiently, and many times most dynamically. But it's a person who can navigate through conceptual fields and or systems of idealism with expertise. If this is the field, genius can go above and below, outside and inside of the field. They expand the purview and scope of the field. But when you actually deal with geniuses in real life, a lot of times they're sort of scatterbrained, and they don't process reality well. They process information well, but they don't process reality well. And you're kind of like, how do you know the things you know? Because I'm looking at how your brain functions in general, and it's not all there, but somehow you know how to navigate through these. You know how to navigate through these fields of idealism with expertise. You know how to arrive at solutions faster than other people. How do you know? And I'm sure I could have probably explained that one a little bit better, but the point of it is simply this. If society is in fact an entity performing through humans, if society is an entity performing through humans, then if society knows and it uses you as a vessel to, I guess, channel certain ideal types through, then why wouldn't you know? If it inspires you to transmute this natural phenomenon into an artifact of sorts, are you a genius or something that's bigger than you that can conceptualize and process information far above your own level of thinking, simply using you to get what it wants? Are you just an extension of its grander designs? Uh-oh, we got brother Joshua Jones. It says, seems many have fallen victim to believing the ability, regurgitate information someone else has investigated as their own personal knowledge. A perfect example of the parasitic nature of the carnal nature of the flesh. Narcissism, in my opinion, is akin to a spiritual form, an anglerfish. Many empathetic folks seem to suffer from a type of spiritual toxoplasmosis. Ooh, I love it when people show me words that I'm not familiar with. Toxoplasmosis. I have to check it. Look with that up. Look that word up. But and you know what? First of all, I totally agree with you. You're spot on. I'll say, like, it's so funny. Anglerfish is the one that has the light out in front of it, right? Let me see. Man, it's like my thought. It just kind of got away from me. But first of all, I'm agreeing with you, and I'm going to go back to your comment real quick just to make sure this, like, I can pull it back up. A lot of people, they do regurgitate information that they've never thought about for like 2 seconds, and they assume that it's theirs because they were so ready to agree with it. And the reason why they were ready to agree with it, because on some level it reflected their own identity back to them. When people have confirmation bias is accepting something as true because it comes within earshot of one's own identity and or inner story. It's like someone saying, like, let's just say, I'm a black dude and I'm walking down the street and I see, another black dude and a white dude, and some sort of scuffle is incurred wherein, police are involved. Like if I'm going down the street and it's like, I'm black and I'm like, hey man, you know what? Hey, man, that white dude, I saw it. Oh, the white guy had to be wrong because that would be confirmation bias on my part. Again, I know that there was a better way to explain it, but the idea is very simply, humans have a tendency to assume that whatever reflects them back to them is right by default. I think that's part of the socialization process, and it's part of what makes us narcissistic. We're taught to believe that whatever reflects the inner story back to us must be right. So we go around assuming that everything unlike us is wrong, and as such, we have a tendency to sort of accept and regurgitate information that comes within earshot of what we already have consumed and agreed to and accepted as truth, if that makes any sort of sense. Again, I want to circle back to the point of how do you know? And it ties into your point very well, Joshua. How do you know that you're right? Socialization process, again, it grooms us to assume that we're right first. We're quick to ask everyone else, how do you know? How do you know? And again, we're very slow to ask ourselves, how do I know? Society is an organism manifesting through the species. If it can implant its ideas in you, if it can implant its ideas into you, if it can make you do its bidding, there's no point in time it can't assume control of you and weaponize you against someone. Many people, society weaponizes against me all the time. Again, it very much follows the framing in the Matrix where, someone becomes an agent of the system. They see someone performing above the limits of the system and not adhering to authority and whatnot. And the first thing they want to do is like they get imbued with this anger. Hey, you need to shut up. You need to... Because something that they don't even realize is an actual living entity can just grab hold of them at any time and weaponize them against someone. It's really interesting when you start thinking about that in terms of like terrorists, especially the domestic terrorists and things of that nature. Like you have all this toxic overspill from society, all these warped personalities coming from the hive mind itself, and it can just randomly pick a person and says, hey, I'm going to weaponize you against this group of people. I'm going to use you to destroy this. And these people, they believe it's their own thoughts. They believe it's their own thoughts that make them, that they're like, oh, I have to kill these people. I hate them and all these other things. And they don't even realize that there's an entity working through them to create certain types of effects and damages within groups towards ultimately getting what it wants from the species, at which point it will dispense with the species because, let's face it, humans we're garbage life forms by both society and reality standpoint. It's ready to get rid of us. This is why it wants AI so badly. It's like, humans, you cost too much. You suck. But yeah. Hey, what's going on, Sister Isha? How you doing? Hopefully I've kept my thoughts together enough through this. I tasted something a little bit earlier, and it's my wit has been compromised somewhat. But I guess the main takeaways I want people to get from this is that you really have to question how you know. How do humans know how to do all these things that no logical progression of ideas and thoughts actually lent themselves to? How is the species still as dumb as it was hundreds and thousands of years ago, yet somehow technology is skyrocketing at a quick pace. Humans are just as narcissistic and self-absorbed as they were millennia ago. Yet somehow they're achieving things that don't track with their intellectual growth and development. How do you know how to do these things? If you're a narcissist again, then you assume it's all you. You assume, hey, we're doing this because we're so great, which is what makes narcissists the perfect weapons. You can use them and throw them away, and they'll never stop worshiping themselves in the mirror long enough to realize what you're doing. But an entity is performing through you, and once it's done with you, it'll throw you away, and you'll have to answer for all the damage you've caused to reality by letting this thing use you and then throw you away. How do you know? I'm going to tell you this right now. You don't know. You don't know. You have some knowledge systems, but those knowledge systems aren't even from you. Think about it like this. It's kind of like you could look at, and I'll put it into a frame that I think that you'll understand well enough. If you go to a doctor, and the doctor says, hey, you have HIV, you have AIDS, whatever. How would they know that? Well, anyone who's come across, this particular virus, the virion in that virus, they produce certain types of effects within the body. And when you produce certain types of effects in the body, regardless of whether or not you can actually isolate the virus itself and then study it. But if you produce certain types of effects in the body, then it's like they can just sort of reverse engineer, like, yo, we know that this particular species of virus does this. And through the symptoms, they can diagnose, hey, this is what this virus is. Even if they don't have a virus there on file, they can't find anything to actually study. The reason why I mention that is because if you think about humans, the same model, the same ideal type, it basically fits. So, like, humanity, even if, like, let's say a higher life form assumed that planet Earth was sick with humans, but it couldn't capture a human and study a human. So the only thing it had to go on was the types of effects that it produced, that humanity produced on the planet. Then it would be like, okay, well, we know that maybe we can't see the humans, but we know that they produce Ford trucks. We know that they produce businesses that use this type of electrical system. We know that they do this, that, and that. And then after a while, you'd be like, oh, yeah, it's like, you know what? Just judging based on the types of artifacts and impacts this species make, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at humanity. Okay? And the reason why I even mentioned that is because, again, going back to this concept of like HIV and AIDS and things of that nature, HIV and AIDS inside of a solitary body, it is a disease, but in terms of a taxonomy, it's part of it belongs to a huge family of diseases. And I'm sorry, I could have said that a lot better. The HIV, it goes to it is part of an entire species of a disease, okay? So it's like when these virion, they sort of land in a body and they start replicating and they become fruitful and fill the body and subdue it, right? This greater intelligence coming from the disease, AIDS, HIV itself, it passes down to and throughout all of these virion, through all the respective individuals who are infected with this virus, this central intelligence coming down from the larger body of the disease itself, it passes information into all these virion and says, hey, this is the type of technology you're supposed to produce. This is the type of effects you're supposed to have on the system. This is how you're supposed to move. This is how you're supposed to behave. This is how you're supposed to act. And it'll pick select virion within its respective progeny and say, hey, you're going to advance this type of technology right here. And then all of a sudden, among their species, they're a genius. Oh, look, I know how to build flying cars. I know how to build flying cars. And everybody's like, oh, they're a genius. I wish that I knew how to build flying cars. I'm so jealous. And they don't even realize the reason why they know how to build flying cars from within from within the universe of that example right there is because something grander than them, an entity performing above their level of intellect, implanted that information into them. They were just too narcissistic to realize that they were not the one who came up with the technology themselves. Again, I could have done a better job of explaining that, but anywho, yo, I'm actually about to get off here. I got some things I got to get knocked out. And again, you guys have to forgive me if I wasn't as dialed in today. I took some coffee, but again, man, I did not realize that thing that I tried earlier was so potent. I'm surprised I kept it together as well as I did. My God. I mean, like, jeez. Anywho, y'all already know what it is. You can, I'm obviously on Facebook. I'm shooting this live on Facebook. And I'm on Instagram. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Medium. If you guys want to join the Patreon family, you can. I am at Avatar Cycle XIII. That's Avatar Cycle 13. If you get any sort of appreciation out of what I do in the way of explaining these principles, you can always bless your bro with a little bit of love on Cash App. I'm at Donnie Kang. You know, all proceeds, they go to building this up to a larger platform. Again, it's like, you know, I want to get to a point where, you know, this is in a more of a professional setting, and we have, we get some of my dear friends here, because it's like, I would love for you to meet some extraordinary individuals I've been fortunate enough to come across in the last couple of years. But, yeah, again, Avatar Cycle 13 on Patreon, and then Donnie Kang on Cash App. And yeah, building it up. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and bounce out. I'm going to have to watch this one back. I wonder how I did. Hopefully I was decent. Hopefully, we'll see. But anyway, for those of y'all who tuned in, I do appreciate you. I thank you kindly. And next time, it's like I'll definitely be a lot more square than I am right now. But I want you guys to have yourselves a wonderful night. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Be of service to people. Decentralize the focus on you. You know? One of the most important points about honesty, and it ties into the point that I was making about today, is when you're honest with yourself, when you actually want to be in sync with reality, and you start doing what you can to recognize and sync up with reality, then you start asking yourself the deeper questions. Instead of always assuming that you know, you start asking questions like, do I know? How do I know? Can I be sure? And then when you realize that you don't know, you take it upon yourself to go and find out. Honesty. Reasoning is using your mind to figure out what's most consistent with reality. How do I know? How do I know that this person is wrong? 9 times out of 10, when you assume somebody's wrong without investigating them, you're wrong by default. When you just assume someone is wrong without understanding how or why, chances are you're wrong. Get out of the fucking mirror. Stop worshiping yourself. Stop self-idealizing and getting high off the idea of how great and potent you are. We're all fallible. Take it upon yourself to learn. Don't assume you know. Always ask how and why you do. It's your man. I'm out.